This is exactly who to stash on your bench to guarantee yourself success in the fantasy football playoffs that aren't the basic guys that are rostered in over 70% of leagues that everybody talks about, but you can't get on your waiver wire already. If you are feeling generous today, please go down and hit that like button. It means a ton to me. It takes 2 seconds for you, but make sure to stick around to the end of the video too, because I will have a list of defenses that are really good we can stream for the fantasy football playoffs. They have great matchups. For some reason, they're still on the waiver wire, but I will never waste your time. The first stash for the week is going to be Patrick Taylor. I don't care what size of league you're in. This is coming off the health of Isaac Guerrero. He had an amazing game last week. We have to be realistic. 26.8 fantasy points, 15 attempts, 72 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns. He got some usage in the receiving game as well. That's really everything you want to see for a running back. But he leaves early with a foot injury, and now we have no idea what his timeline is to return at the time of this recording at least. He was a DNP on Monday. He isn't practicing yet, and now they're coming into a short week against the Rams on Thursday. There's a very high chance that he is not good to go this week. But Patrick Taylor could single-handedly win you a week and advance you into the next of the fantasy playoffs because he's not rostered in higher than 50% of leagues. I truly believe there's a higher than 50% chance that Isaac Guerrero does miss this week. The reason I say that he's such a good add this week is because we continue to see the 49ers, they make and breed valuable running backs in fantasy football with the scheme that they run. But regardless of who the running back is, whether it's Patrick Taylor, Jordan Mason, Isaac Guerrero, whatever it ends up being, every single running back that has started for this 49ers team in the history of 2024, they're averaging 20 rushing attempts and over 3 targets a game. Like, you just don't get that anywhere else. They run a workhorse system. They do not do committees. After Isaac Guerrero went down, we saw that Patrick Taylor was the number 1 running back in this backfield, seeing 7 carries, 100% of the goal line work, I may add, which is a good sign to their trust for Patrick Taylor. That's compared to Keyshawn Vaughn, who only saw 2 touches total on that day. At the very least, he's a safety valve that you can roster, and he gets some really good playoff matchups against the Rams, Dolphins, and Lions. The Lions isn't a great one, but I mean, if Isaac Guerrero misses 2 weeks, Patrick Taylor's a league winner for those 2 weeks, and you can get him pretty cheap because if you're like me, everybody spent every dollar of their fab to get Isaac Guerrero, so you can probably get some pretty good value out of him for that. But we do need to be stashing Cedric Tillman, another guy here, as soon as possible though. He's likely to return from his concussion coming into this week against the Chiefs, and the reason, before anything else that I get into, is because of the sheer passing volume of Jameis Winston. It is absolutely insane. Since taking over for Deshaun Watson in week 8, he's averaging 46.5 passing attempts if you exclude that one game that they played in the blizzard of Pittsburgh in week 12. Like, that doesn't really count because nobody could really pass the ball. Almost 50 passing attempts a game is literally unheard of, and this team as a whole is averaging 20.5 points per game since Jameis Winston came into this offense, which, number one, is an upgrade from Deshaun Watson, but at least those passing attempts is turning into opportunities and possibly touchdown upside for these wide receivers, so it is a win-win situation there, and he's locked into a minimum of 40 passing attempts a game. That is drastically going to make these wide receivers, even the least talented wide receiver, even you or me, to get at least a couple of targets a game if you can haul it in, so that's always going to be a plus, let alone a guy like Cedric Tillman, who is a very, very, very talented wide receiver in this league. He's averaging 8.8 targets per game since Winston came in, including week 12 where he only played 53% of the snaps before leaving the game early with his concussion. He is one of the most heavily targeted wide receivers in this offense. Before getting injured, he led the team in first read target share, first downs per route run, and all of his efficiency stats look really good. Now, we do have Judy emerging as a wide receiver 1 in his absence, but again, with all this pass volume, it doesn't matter who the wide receiver 1 is, who the wide receiver 2 is. They're all going to be viable in fantasy football. And again, they have a lot of pass-first, wide receiver-friendly matchups in the playoffs against the Chiefs, Bengals, and Dolphins. All spots where we want to be starting Cedric Tillman. You can get him off the waivers and start him as soon as possible. That's a really good stash in my opinion. But a bit more of a sleeper stash we do want to be looking at if you want to go down the ranks a little bit is going to be Isaiah Davis, who is 100% worth it at this point in the year. Breece Hall last week misses because of his knee injury. He's been dealing with it for the last 2 weeks now. We don't know how serious it is, but we can use our smart thinking brains here and see that it's not a great situation. You look at the Jets, they've done an amazing job at securing the last seed in the AFC East at 3-10. Yes, they're tied with the Patriots. That is absolutely terrible though, but there's no reason to rush him back into this offense. They're not going to make the playoffs. Aaron Rodgers probably won't be on the team next year. There's a whole bunch of things up in the air. Why risk the health of your number 1 best running back on your team for a season that's pretty much thrown away at this point? So there's a real chance that Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis are going to be splitting this backfield to finish out the rest of the season, but I wasn't expecting this close of a split last week. They had their first week together as the RB1 and 2, and their numbers were almost identical. We look at these two, they were 5th and 4th round picks already. That's pretty close, but the numbers, 56% of the snaps with 11 carries, 43 yards on 14% of the targets. good for 4 receptions for Braylon Allen. But then when you look at Isaiah Davis, 53% of the snaps, 10 carries, 40 yards on the ground, a 16% target share with 3 receptions. So the split is literally in every single statistic. The only difference here is that Isaiah Davis saw 66% of the short yardage snaps. Rushing attempts inside the 5, I'd expect them to go to Braylon Allen, but they didn't get that. So it's just a split completely. Rodgers threw for his highest yardage total last week as well since 2021. The running backs are going to get their volume in the receiving game. It's just what they've been doing, whether it's Brees, whether it's Braylon, whoever it is. But we do have to be honest, this offense is not going to be this high powered as far as efficiency goes every single week, but they still do deserve to be stashed, especially if we do have Brees Hall missing a good amount of time for the rest of the next 3 weeks of the fantasy playoffs. But if you don't want them, another running back that is making his case right now is Kendre Miller. He has shown us that he deserves to be on our roster. Ever since coming in and out of IR, he's actually been showing a little bit of light in his opportunities this year, and even since being drafted, he's been efficient. In his first game off IR in week 7, he saw 29% of the snaps, showing the Saints he can be him when he's healthy. He also saw a good amount of touches in that number as well. He misses more time, then he comes back again. Last week sees his highest snap share and his highest touch total of the entire year. The reason that he's better than just a random handcuff like Cam Akers or like Dameon Pierce is because of the situation that the Saints are in. Like the Jets, the team is 5-8. They're second to last in the NFC South. They still technically have a playoff chance, but it's not close. Derek Carr is dealing with injury. They have no wide receivers at this point. If they lose one of their next 2 or even less than that, they will be far out of the playoff picture, and there's a really good chance that they slow down Alvin Kamara as well. He is getting older. I really don't think there's a debate of if he gets slowed down. I think the debate is more of, is he going to get slowed down before week 17 of the fantasy football playoffs? That's more of the question here. I'd rather get Kendre Miller while I still can before it's too late. You look at his next matchups. He gets the Commanders this week, then the Packers and the Raiders to finish out the fantasy season. If he's already getting 10 carries in his very first game off of IR and a win against the Giants that was not a blowout, that could be a glimpse to what we can see in the future. Miller's health is the one thing that's holding him back. In the starts that he has had in his career, he's averaging a 41% missed tackles forced per attempt ratio. He's top 10 in running back elusiveness, yards after the contact, and a decent usage in the receiving game as well. Kind of everything you want to see. He did get a touchdown last week and a few goal line attempts as well, which is showing his trust in this offense and kind of a green light to why we want to be stashing him. A lot of this does come down to what we get with Alvin Kamara though, but I want to be one step ahead, which is why we stash these guys. But on the other hand, there are actually some really good streaming tight end options this week into the fantasy football playoffs. My number one by a huge margin, I don't understand how he's not rostered in 70% of leagues, is Juwan Johnson. Now being the tight end 1 with Taysom Hill being out for the year with a torn ACL. Carr is dealing with an injury. Yeah, that's kind of a fact too, but he could be playing this week. Even if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. He gets a matchup against the Commanders. I simply do not care who this quarterback is, because there are no wide receiver options for this offense. We don't have a Chris Olave in this offense. We don't have an A.J. Brown that is going to get all of the targets. Their best receiver is Marquez Valdez-Scantling or Cedric Tillman, if you want to call it that. He is pretty much the number 1 option in this offense. In his 2 games, starting as the tight end 1 for Taysom Hill, he put up 8.6 and 15 fantasy points, combining for a total in those 2 weeks of 12 targets, 86 yards, and a touchdown. He is leading the team in first read target share as well as regular target share since the absence of Taysom Hill, which is important because this team now without Taysom Hill is running a more conventional offense. When you don't have him lining up at quarterback, running back, tight end, defenses don't really have to worry as much about what's going to happen in this offense. So they can have a real tight end and a real tight end role. It's allowed Juwan Johnson to be the number 1 guy, playing the most snaps in the offense, but most importantly, running the most routes by a huge margin. Even if we have Foster Moreau in this offense blocking, if he's not running routes, then it really doesn't matter. Juwan Johnson is a huge red zone threat. He has been for the entirety of his career. That's kind of been his one trademark, even if he isn't the best tight end in the league. But again, this offense has no choice but to keep it short. Regardless of who the quarterback is, the offensive line isn't great. They don't have time for routes to develop downfield, and even then, Marquez Valdez-Scantling is the only downfield guy that there is going to be. But having him does help them a lot because it takes the top off defenses and allows them to work a little bit more in the short game. He gets the Commanders again, the Packers and the Raiders in the fantasy playoffs, all extremely good matchups for tight end points allowed in that stretch. But if you don't want to get your hands on him, or maybe you can't, he's already rostered, Stone Smart is one of the best pure sleepers in fantasy football right now, because we do have Will Dissly leaving last week early against the Chiefs with a shoulder injury. Now he's slated to miss a few weeks. Like, that's pretty big. They could place him out for the rest of the fantasy season or the regular season at that, making Stone Smart the number 1 tight end in this offense. Last week in his replacement, he ran and dominated in routes run at the tight end position compared to his tight end 2 backup at Tucker Fisk, the only other active tight end in this offense. But the great thing about this team and Stone Smart is that they stick to a one tight end scheme for the majority of their sets. They have one tight end running routes, and Stone Smart was that guy last week, finishing with 3 targets, catching all of them for 54 yards on the day. Keep in mind, he only played 37% of the snaps when Disley left, so 3 targets on 30% of the snaps, and he did provide some light for this offense. He looked decent if you watched the game, and they have a very favorable tight end schedule for fantasy points allowed against the Buccaneers this week, then the Broncos and the Patriots in their next 3. I wouldn't necessarily advise you to throw him into your starting lineup this early against the Buccaneers. Again, I do want to see how many snaps he plays, how many routes he runs in his first real game as a tight end 1 without Will Disley. But stashing guys and being one step ahead in fantasy football is what you want to do, and this is a position to do that for you. We know this offense can support guys. They're increasing their pass volume at about 31 attempts per game since their bye week in week 5. But if he's too low profile of a tight end for you, one guy that, again, nobody is talking about but I absolutely love is Daniel Bellinger from the Giants. With Theo Johnson out for the rest of the season with a foot injury, it's allowed him to be the tight end 1 and get almost 100% of the routes, the snaps, and the targets from the tight end position. If we look at last week, it was his first game as a true tight end 1 for this team. He sees 5 receptions on 7 targets for 45 yards against the Saints defense. That is pretty good at stopping tight ends, all things considered. For the same reason that I was on Theo Johnson earlier in the year, if you did watch these stash videos all year long, we're going to be getting Bellinger as well because the fantasy playoff schedule is very positive. He gets the Ravens, Falcons, and Colts, all pass-first matchups and all positive matchups to allowing points to the tight end position as well. That's a great mix of things to be stashing him and possibly even starting him as soon as this week. He played 78% of the snaps last week. The only other tight end that saw usage was Greg Dulcich. He saw 1% of the snap. They also had another tight end, but only blocked. He didn't get a single route. Drew Lock is set to start at quarterback for this team. If healthy, he is still questionable, but it is a matchup against the Ravens, and they are projected to lose this game by double-digit points. An insane amount. You know the pass volume is going to be absolutely insane from this Giants team. And in the 2 starts that Drew Lock has had for the Giants, he's averaging 40.5 passing attempts a game. So like Jameis Winston, on a smaller level, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for these receivers, but more specifically, the tight ends that run really short routes. Because number 1, the Giants have one of the lowest depth per pass attempts in the league. They also have one of the least amount of times to pass in the league. Because with Lock, with DeVito, regardless of who it is, they're a bad quarterback. But number 2, they have no time to pass in the pocket. With Andrew Thomas injured, they have a terrible offensive line. They can't let their routes develop downfield, which is why Malik Neighbors has been falling off as of late. I did call it, but I'm not going to take my victory laps yet. The tight ends are going to have some decent numbers. But now time for the defenses that we can stash. I love this part of the video, getting down and dirty and nerdy with these defenses. The first amazing option for this week is going to be the Cardinals. They're my number 1 team here. The first week of the playoffs, which is this week, they get the Patriots in an amazing matchup. They're 23rd in EPA per play, and they allow the 6th most points to opposing defenses. Then they get the Panthers the week after that, who are also bottom 10 in EPA per play, despite Bryce Young actually playing a lot better. He still does make some mistakes. Then they get the Rams in the fantasy playoffs, a situation where I don't really want to be starting them. We would probably pick up a team like the Dolphins or another team like the Chargers that has a really good week 17 defensive matchup there. But another team is the Falcons. We can go ahead and stash them. They are a great streamer for the next few weeks. They get a matchup here against the Raiders, who we can all safely say is going to be a very positive one. Aiden O'Connell is at risk of missing this week. If we do have Desmond Ridder at quarterback, it's going to be that much better for the Falcons. He drastically decreases their offensive upside. They also get the Giants in week 15, which we've seen as another extremely positive matchup and very, very bad as far as quarterbacks go. Drew Lock is averaging 202 passing yards, but on 40 attempts. Like, that is extremely inefficient. He's one of the least efficient quarterbacks in the NFL. He's thrown 2 interceptions and 0 touchdowns since becoming the starter 2 weeks ago. The Giants team is by far out of the playoffs. I wouldn't be surprised if they just stop blocking for him completely. But there's not that many defenses we can pick up that are streamable for the next 3 weeks because everybody's ahead of them already. I will go over the defenses later in a video tomorrow. If you want a complete list of the defenses for week 15, the best fantasy playoff defenses for the entire 3 weeks, make sure to stick around for tomorrow. But that is the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. All glory to the man above.